dear students, once again welcome back to Bosco Campusation YouTube channel of Kottayam Don Bosco College. I am Raniar, faculty member of PG Department of English. This time I am here with the paper European Fiction, which is the elective paper for MA Semester 3 students under Kerala University. So in this series actually we are discussing historical background of European literature. Now we had covered almost 8 different periods. In this class we are discussing different features of modernism. So let's begin our class. The modern period or 20th century is sometimes called a century of isms or a century of vanguardism. Vanguardism, as you know, it is the beliefs and activities of persons who consider themselves to be leaders in a particular field or school of thoughts. So in modern age we can see a lot of isms. So these are also called literary trends or concepts. Now let's check different literary trends and concepts in European literature during the time of modern age. We can say that different isms. The first one we are discussing is symbolism. Symbolism was a movement in literature, especially in poetry, and it had flourished in between 1870s and 1890s. This movement had begun in France. So, symbolism, the basic idea is symbol. In the simplest sense, we can say that symbol is anything that stands for something else beyond it. Usually, it is an idea conventionally associated with it. For example, rose symbolizes love. So, conventionally, rose symbolizes love. Here, rose is a concrete thing. It represents an abstract idea that is love. This movement, symbolism, was influenced by Schopenhauer's pessimistic aesthetics and Swedenborg's theory of correspondences. It uses concrete images as symbols to express an emotion or an abstract idea to represent an ideal world. The aim of symbolism is that poetry should suggest rather than the direct statements. So there are various writers who employed symbolism in poetry, and the famous figures were Charles Baudelaire, W.B. Yeats, Stephen Mallarmé, Paul Verlaine, Arthur Rimbaud, etc. Charles Baudelaire was a French symbolist. His important work is The Flowers of Evil, which is a poem collection. W.B. Yeats was another writer of Ireland. He was the leader of Irish Renaissance, and he was a crucial figure behind the founding of Abbey Theatre in Dublin. His famous symbolist poems are The Lake Isle of Inisuri, The Second Coming, Sailing to Byzantium, etc. Stephen Mallarmé, Paul Verlaine, Arthur Rimbaud, etc. were also French symbolists. Mallarmé's poetry is often too obscure to understand. Verlaine's poetry is difficult for its subtlety and musical suggestiveness, whereas Rimbaud's poetry is marked by distorted senses. So these are the specialities of the writers of symbolist movements. Next one is Imagism. Imagism is an Anglo-American literary movement of the 20th century, especially seen in poetry. It raised as a reaction against Victorian morality and Georgian verse. The term Imagism was initially coined by Ezra Pound in 1912. This movement was highly influenced by Japanese haiku and Chinese ideographic poems. In addition to Ezra Pound, Amy Lowell, Carl Sandburg, and also William Carlos Williams employed this in their poems. It emphasizes precise presentation of the individual image and proposes avoiding cliches, adopting the form of free verse, producing the musical phrase. Amy Lowell and Richard Aldington rejected the didactic, the decorative, and insisted on economy in verse, employment of ordinary speech, absolute clarity, and complete freedom in the choice of subject. Imagism emphasizes precise presentation of the individual image and proposes avoiding cliches, adopting the form of free verse, producing musical phrase. The Red Wheelbarrow is a famous poem written by William Carlos Williams, is an example of Imagist poem. Another important movement is expressionism. It is famous as German expressionism. It is an early 20th century German movement in art and literature flourished from 1900 to 1935. Expressionism sought to present a subjective view of something just like Impressionism. It looked inward for images and expressed purely internal, visionary experience in which things were distorted and even became nightmarish. So, what we seen in our dreams or what we seen in inward us, that is presented as it is. So, expressionism proved successful in the literary genre, drama, and also in visual arts. Vincent van Gogh, Gauguin, Henri Matisse, Pablo Picasso, etc. were the famous expressionists used this particular movement in their paintings. Expressionism was a historical movement. It began in Germany before First World War. So there are a lot of writers who employed expressionism in literature. The famous are Franz Kafka and Eugene O'Neill. Franz Kafka's important work is The Metamorphosis, and Eugene O'Neill is a famous American dramatist. Emperor Jones and The Hairy Ape are his famous plays. Next important movement is Dadaism. Dadaism was an art and literary movement which was organized in Zurich by Tristan Tzara, a Romanian and French avant-garde writer, and others. Dadaism was flourished during the First World War. It was a nihilistic movement negating all traditional values of philosophy and arts, as it protested against the insane destruction of life and civilization during the First World War. So, Dadaism was a protest against the traditional values of philosophy. The word Dada, it is a French baby talk word for hobby horse. Dadais used nonsensical words to suggest their practice, replacing logical reason and harmonious beauty with deliberate insanity and discordant chaos. Hugo Ball, Richard Hollenbeck, Tristan, etc. were famous Dadais. In art forms, Dadais suggests artworks were composed of unorthodox materials with collages of randomly cut collared paper, litter, and ready-made objects, which both ignored and attacked conventional aesthetic values. So Dadaism, it was reacted against the traditional philosophical values. Next important movement is Cubism. Cubism is the most revolutionary movement of early modern art developed in France in between 1907 and 1920s. Pablo Picasso was the actual founder of Cubism. It was a new way of seeing nature and work of art. The painter Pablo Picasso was the actual founder of Cubism, who was a follower of Paul Cézanne, the great post-impressionist, and Georges Braque in Paris. So in Cubism, actually I told you, it was a movement that happened in between 1907 and 1920s. So the period from 1910 to 1912 is referred to analytical cubism. Analytical cubism suggests paintings executed during this period show the breaking of analysis of form, right angle, and straight line construction. Okay, so conventionally, this particular so-called art form what were the so-called art forms? So they use only right angle and they use straight line construction. So all these things were rejected, and Cubism put forward new ideas. So the Renaissance tradition of painting based on perspectives had been devoted largely to the limitation of nature. The painting becomes painted illusion of a person and maybe still life or landscape. So that is Cubism. Next important movement is Futurism. Futurism was a movement in 1909. It was founded by the Italian poet Filippo Tommaso Marinetti, which spread to art, music, and literature. So, futurism had its influence on not only in art but also music and also literature. This idea, the idea of futurism was initially launched in a Paris newspaper, and the name of the newspaper was Le Figaro. And this newspaper was put forwarded by Filippo. Futurism is a study of the future with a view toward anticipating, preparing for, and influencing future events. This futurism helps individuals to develop knowledge, attitude, and also skills. Futurism was greatly influenced by Cubism, Dadaism, expressionism, and also surrealism. So, like futurism, another important movements came forward were Vorticism and Ultraism. Vorticism was an artistic movement announced in London in 1914. So, what is the speciality of 1914? Yes, the First World War begins in 1914. This Vorticism is closely associated with Imagism. The leaders of Vorticism were Percy Wyndham Lewis, Ezra Pound, and Jacob Epstein. The primary concern of Vorticism was with the form, that means color and line, not the content. Okay, so the speciality of Vorticism is it influenced the form of the painting, that means color and line used in the painting, not the content. Another important movement was Ultraism. It was an avant-garde movement by some Spanish poets in the early 20s. This was led by Guillermo de Torre. They rejected all previous poetic traditions and aimed for the creation of a purified poetry liberated from formal, logical, or narrative structure and from human emotional substance. So, according to Ultrais, they rejected all previous poetic traditions. So, what was the conventional poetic traditions? So, that poetic tradition, they completely rejected the poetic traditions and aimed for the creation of a purified poetry, which is liberated from formal, logical, or narrative structure. So, that is the speciality of Ultraism.
Okay, my dear students, I hope you understood various isms discussed today. Actually, modern age is not yet completed, and let's discuss the remaining in detail in the coming classes. So, see you in the next class. Do the homework and send me through WhatsApp. Thank you. Have a nice time.